What happens when a millionaire CEO sees the family she abandoned 5 years ago? The answer will break your heart and change everything you think you know about love, sacrifice, and second chances. Stay with me until the end of this incredible journey, and please comment which city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story has traveled across the world. The rain hammered against the bulletproof windows of the black Mercedes as it crawled through Manhattan's evening traffic. Isabella Hayes sat in the leather back seat, her manicured fingers dancing across her phone screen, approving million-dollar deals with the same casual indifference most people reserved for choosing what to have for lunch. At 34, she commanded a tech empire worth $8 billion. Her name whispered in boardrooms from Silicon Valley to Singapore, with equal parts reverence and fear. "Mrs. Hayes, we're going to be about 15 minutes late to the Goldman meeting," her driver Marcus called back through the partition. "Tell them to wait," Isabella replied without looking up from her screen. "They need us more than we need them." It was Tuesday, October 15th, and Isabella's world operated with the precision of Swiss clockwork. Every minute was scheduled, every interaction calculated, every decision filtered through the cold mathematics of profit and loss. She had built Nexus Technologies from a cramped studio apartment into a global powerhouse, and she had done it by never allowing sentiment to cloud her judgment. The traffic crawled to a complete stop near Central Park, and Isabella finally glanced up from her phone, irritation flickering across her sharp features. Through the rain-streaked window, she could see the park's entrance, where a few hardy souls braved the weather with umbrellas and determination. That's when she saw them. At first, it was just a glimpse, a man on a bench under a large oak tree, its branches providing some shelter from the rain. He was reading a book to two small figures huddled close to him on either side. Something about the scene made Isabella's chest tighten, with an emotion she couldn't immediately identify. Then the man looked up, perhaps sensing he was being watched, and Isabella's world tilted on its axis. Daniel Carter. Even through 5 years and the distortion of rain on glass, she would have recognized that face anywhere. The gentle brown eyes that had once looked at her with such love, the stubble that was now touched with premature gray, the mouth that had whispered promises in the dark that she had believed would last forever. But it was the two little girls pressed against his sides that made Isabella's phone slip from her nerveless fingers. Lily and Grace, her daughters, the children she had walked away from when they were barely 2 years old. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hand pressed against the window, as if she could reach through the glass and time itself to touch them. The girls were 7 now, no longer the toddlers with chubby cheeks and uncertain steps that haunted her dreams. Lily, the older twin by 6 minutes, had Isabella's dark hair falling in waves past her shoulders. Grace had inherited Daniel's lighter brown locks curled and wild from the humidity. They were both animated, pointing at pictures in the book, their mouths moving in excited chatter that Isabella couldn't hear but could feel in her bones. They looked happy. They looked loved. They looked like they had never needed her at all. The realization hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and making her vision blur. She had told herself for 5 years that leaving had been the right choice, the only choice. She had been 29, drowning in postpartum depression, terrified by the weight of responsibility that motherhood had dropped on her shoulders like a crushing boulder. Every crying fit from the twins had felt like an accusation, every sleepless night a reminder of her inadequacy. Daniel had tried to help, of course. Sweet, patient Daniel, who taught 3rd grade and believed that love could solve anything. But Isabella had felt like she was disappearing, her ambitious dreams suffocating under the weight of diapers and feeding schedules and the relentless, terrifying need of 2 tiny humans who depended on her for everything. So she had done what she did best. She had run. "I need some air," she had told Daniel one gray February morning when the twins were crying, and she felt like she might scream if she stayed in that apartment one more second. "Just for an hour, I'll be back." But she hadn't come back. Not that day, not the next week, not ever. She had sent money, of course. Generous amounts transferred to Daniel's account every month without fail. Legal documents that ensured the girls would never want for anything material. But she had never called, never written, never even driven past their building on the rare occasions when business brought her to their old neighborhood. Now, watching them through the rain, Isabella felt the full weight of those 5 lost years crushing down on her chest. She had missed their first days of school, their first lost teeth, their first skinned knees and childhood fears and bedtime stories. She had missed everything that mattered while building an empire that suddenly felt as hollow as her chest. "Mrs. Hayes," Marcus's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you all right?" Isabella couldn't answer. She couldn't look away from the window, couldn't stop memorizing every detail of the scene before her. Grace was laughing at something in the book, her head thrown back in pure joy, and the sound carried across the park even though Isabella couldn't hear it. Daniel was smiling too, that soft, patient smile that had made Isabella fall in love with him in the first place. The traffic began to move, and panic flooded Isabella's system. "Stop the car," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ma'am, stop the car." The words exploded from her with such force that Marcus immediately pulled over, earning angry honks from the vehicles behind them. Isabella's hand was on the door handle before she realized what she was doing. For one wild moment, she imagined herself running across the wet grass, calling their names, falling to her knees, and begging for forgiveness that she didn't deserve. She imagined sweeping them both into her arms and promising never to leave again. But then what could she possibly say to explain 5 years of silence? How could she look into Daniel's eyes and tell him that she had chosen her career over their children? How could she explain to 2 7-year-old girls why their mother had simply vanished from their lives without a trace? Her hand fell away from the door handle as the weight of her choices settled over her like a shroud. "Mrs. Hayes." Marcus was looking at her in the rearview mirror, his weathered face creased with concern. "Should I drive?" Isabella said quietly. "Just drive." As the Mercedes pulled back into traffic, Isabella twisted in her seat to keep watching them until the last possible moment. Daniel was gathering up the book, and their small backpacks probably preparing to head home before the rain got worse. The girls were dancing around him, their energy infectious even from a distance. Then they were gone, swallowed by the trees and the rain, and the 5 years that Isabella could never get back. She sat in stunned silence for the rest of the drive to Goldman Sachs, her mind replaying every second of those precious few minutes. When Marcus opened her door at the towering building, Isabella realized she couldn't remember anything about the ride except for the image burned into her retinas, her family whole and happy without her. The Goldman meeting passed in a blur. Isabella signed the contracts and shook the appropriate hands, her body operating on autopilot, while her mind remained trapped on that park bench. She was vaguely aware of the executives praising her vision, her business acumen, her ability to turn every venture into gold. But their words felt meaningless, echoing in a space inside her chest that had suddenly become vast and empty. It wasn't until she was back in her penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park that the full reality of what she had seen began to sink in. She stood at her floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the park where her daughters had been just hours before, and felt something crack open inside her chest. The apartment was a testament to her success, 15,000 square feet of marble and steel and artwork that cost more than most people made in a lifetime. But standing there in the gathering darkness, Isabella had never felt so alone. She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers and did something she hadn't done in 5 years. She searched for Daniel Carter. The results made her stomach clench. His Facebook profile was mostly private, but she could see enough to piece together fragments of the life he had built without her. There were photos of the girls at school events, at birthday parties, at the zoo. Daniel looked older, thinner than she remembered, but he was smiling in every picture. There was no mention of another woman, no wedding ring visible in any of the photos. He was raising their daughters alone, just as she had left him to do. Isabella's thumb hovered over his name, the urge to click overwhelming. But what would she say? How could she bridge 5 years of silence with a Facebook message? Instead, she found herself dialing a number she had memorized, but never used. "Blackstone Investigations," a gruff voice answered. "This is Isabella Hayes. I need you to find someone for me." "Of course, Mrs. Hayes. Name? Daniel Carter. He lives in Brooklyn with 2 7-year-old girls. I need to know everything." There was a pause. Everything meaning employment, finances, medical records, daily routines. "How deep do you want us to go?" Isabella closed her eyes, hating herself for what she was about to ask. "Everything. I need to know how they are, what they need, if they're okay. We'll have a preliminary report within 48 hours." Isabella hung up and sank onto her Italian leather sofa, her head in her hands. Outside, the city glittered like a circuit board, millions of lights representing millions of lives, millions of choices that couldn't be undone. She had built her empire by being decisive, by never looking back, by cutting away anything that threatened her focus. But sitting in her perfect apartment surrounded by the fruits of her ambition, Isabella finally understood the true cost of her success. She had traded her family for everything she thought she wanted. And now, seeing them happy without her, she realized that everything meant nothing at all. The next 48 hours passed in a haze of meetings and conference calls that Isabella navigated on pure muscle memory. She closed a deal with a Japanese tech firm worth $200 million and felt nothing. She fired 3 executives who had been skimming from the company pension fund and felt nothing. She appeared on the cover of Forbes as one of America's most powerful women and felt nothing. All she could think about was the way Grace had thrown her head back when she laughed, the careful way Lily had pointed to pictures in the book, the protective curve of Daniel's arm around both girls as they read together in the rain. When her phone finally rang with the call she had been both dreading and desperate for, Isabella nearly dropped it. "Mrs. Hayes, this is Rick Blackstone. I have that report you requested." "Tell me," Isabella said, her voice barely steady. "Daniel Carter, age 36, elementary school teacher at PS 234 in Brooklyn. Lives in a 2-bedroom apartment on Prospect Avenue with his twin daughters, Lily and Grace Carter, age 7. He's been their sole guardian since February 2019. Isabella winced at the date. 5 years, 3 months, and 12 days since she had walked out. "Financial situation appears stable but tight," Blackstone continued. "Teacher's salary of $48,000 annually plus the monthly deposits you've been making. He's careful with money shops at discount stores, clips, coupons. The girls appear well cared for, good schools, healthcare, extracurricular activities. What about socially? Is there anyone else in their lives, a girlfriend, family, friends? No romantic relationship that we could identify. His social circle consists mainly of other teachers and parents from the girls' school. His mother lives in Florida, visits twice a year. That's about it." Isabella felt a mixture of relief and guilt. Relief that Daniel hadn't replaced her guilt, that he was carrying the burden alone. "Is there anything else?" she asked. There was a long pause. "Mrs. Hayes, there is something else. Something I think you need to know." Isabella's blood turned to ice. "What?" Daniel Carter was diagnosed with early-onset Huntington's disease 6 months ago. The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. The phone slipped from her hand, clattering onto the marble floor. She could hear Blackstone's tinny voice calling her name, but the sound seemed to come from underwater. Huntington's disease. She knew enough about it to understand what that meant. Progressive. Degenerative. Eventually fatal. Daniel's body and mind would slowly betray him, stealing his coordination, his speech, his memories, his life. And he was facing it alone. Isabella's legs gave out, and she found herself sitting on the cold floor of her kitchen, the phone beside her ear as Blackstone's voice grew more urgent. "Mrs. Hayes, are you there, Mrs. Hayes?" With shaking hands, she picked up the phone. "How long does he have?" The progression varies, but typically 10 to 20 years from onset of symptoms. He's already showing some early signs: slight tremor in his left hand, occasional balance issues. But he's still functional, still working. "Do the girls know?" "Unknown. He's been very discreet about medical appointments, but children are perceptive. It's possible they've noticed changes, but don't understand what they mean." Isabella closed her eyes, imagining Daniel trying to explain to their 7-year-old daughters that Daddy was sick, that he might not always be able to take care of them. The thought made her physically ill. "Mrs. Hayes, do you want us to continue monitoring the situation?" "No," Isabella whispered. "No, that's enough." She hung up and sat in the silence of her empty apartment, staring at the phone in her hands. Outside, the city hummed with life and possibility, but all Isabella could hear was the sound of time running out. Daniel was dying. Slowly, yes, but inevitably, and their daughters would have to watch it happen, would have to learn what it meant to lose someone they loved, piece by piece, just like Isabella had lost them. But they had lost her by choice. Daniel's loss would be beyond anyone's control. For the first time in 5 years, Isabella allowed herself to truly feel the weight of what she had done. She had abandoned her children when they needed her most. She had left Daniel to raise them alone, to face every challenge and milestone and fear without a partner. And now he was facing the greatest challenge of all, a terminal diagnosis, and the knowledge that he might not live to see their girls grow up. Isabella had built an empire worth billions, but she had never felt poorer in her life. She thought about the woman she had been 5 years ago, terrified, overwhelmed, drowning in a responsibility she hadn't been prepared for. She had been so afraid of failing as a mother that she had simply refused to try. But looking at the successful, confident woman she had become, Isabella realized something that cut her to the bone. She wasn't that frightened girl anymore. She had conquered boardrooms filled with men who tried to intimidate her. She had built a company from nothing and turned it into a global powerhouse. She had faced down hostile takeovers and industry disruption and emerged stronger every time. If she could do all of that, why couldn't she learn to be a mother? The answer was simple and devastating. Because being a mother required something that business success didn't: the willingness to love someone more than yourself, to put their needs above your own ambition, to risk everything for the chance to be enough for someone who depended on you completely. It required everything Isabella had spent 5 years learning to do in the business world, but it also required the one thing she had been too afraid to give her heart. But hearts Isabella was learning were not like businesses. You couldn't control them with strategic planning and calculated risks. You couldn't build walls around them and expect them to function. And you certainly couldn't abandon them for 5 years and expect them to remain unchanged. As she sat on the floor of her perfect apartment, Isabella made a decision that terrified her more than any business deal ever had. She was going to see Daniel, She was going to face the man she had loved and abandoned, the father who had raised their children alone, the person who had every right to hate her for what she had done. She was going to ask for something which didn't deserve and probably couldn't earn a chance to be part of their lives again. But first, she had to find the courage to pick up the phone and dial a number she had memorized 5 years ago, but never had the strength to use. Isabella's hands shook as she scrolled through her contacts to the entry she had never deleted: Daniel Carter. Home. For 5 years, that number had sat in her phone like a secret, a possibility she had never been brave enough to explore. Now, with the knowledge of his diagnosis burning in her chest, she realized that time was a luxury they no longer had. She pressed call before she could lose her nerve. The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, a familiar voice answered, and Isabella's world stopped spinning. Hello. It was Daniel, and he sounded exactly the same as she remembered: warm, patient, with just a hint of wariness that suggested he didn't recognize the number. Isabella opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. How did you begin a conversation that was 5 years overdue? How did you explain the unexplainable? Hello, Daniel said again, and this time Isabella caught something else in his voice, a slight tremor that made her chest tight with anguish. Daniel, she finally managed, his name falling from her lips like a prayer. It's Isabella. The silence that followed was so complete that Isabella wondered if the call had dropped. Then she heard the sharp intake of breath, the sound of something being set down heavily, the soft curse that Daniel probably didn't realize he had spoken aloud. Isabella. Her name in his voice was like a knife to the heart, full of pain and disbelief, and something that might have been hope but was probably just shock. Jesus, I can't. Why are you calling? I saw you. Isabella said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Yesterday in Central Park. You were with the girls reading under the tree and You saw us. Daniel's voice was flat now, carefully controlled. And what, you decided to check in? See how your investment was doing. The bitterness in his tone made Isabella flinch, but she pressed on. I know I have no right to call. I know I have no right to ask anything of you. But Daniel, I need to see you. I need to explain. Explain. The word exploded from him with such force that Isabella pulled the phone away from her ear. Explain what, Isabella? How you walked out on us, how you left me alone with 2 babies and never looked back. How you've been sending money like that somehow makes up for 5 years of silence. Isabella was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she pressed her back against the cold kitchen cabinets. I know I hurt you. I know I failed them, failed you, failed everything that mattered. But Daniel, I'm different now. I've changed and I want. You want, Daniel said, and his voice was deadly quiet. This is about what you want. Of course it is. It's always been about what you want, hasn't it, Isabella? No, Isabella said desperately. This is about them, about Lily and Grace and the fact that they deserve to know their mother. This is about you facing what you're facing alone when you don't have to. Another silence, longer this time. When Daniel spoke again, his voice was different, smaller, more vulnerable. You know about the diagnosis. It wasn't a question. Isabella closed her eyes, hating herself for having him investigated, for invading his privacy even as she tried to help. Yes, she whispered. I know. How? I hired someone. I'm sorry. I know that was wrong, but I needed to know if you were okay, if the girls were okay. Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in it. Okay. We're falling apart, Isabella. I'm dying by degrees and our daughters are going to have to watch it happen. So no, we're not okay. The raw pain in his voice broke something inside Isabella's chest. That's why I'm calling. You don't have to do this alone anymore. I want to help. I want to be there for them, for you. Where were you when Lily had nightmares for 6 months after you left? Daniel's voice was rising again. Where were you when Grace asked me every day for a year when Mommy was coming home? Where were you when I had to explain to 2 3-year-olds that sometimes people just leave and never come back? Each question was a blade between Isabella's ribs, cutting deeper than the last. I was building a life, she said, the words sounding pathetic, even to her own ears. I was trying to become someone who could be enough for them. You were already enough, Daniel shouted, and Isabella could hear something breaking in his voice. You were their mother, that was enough, but you decided it wasn't, and you left us to figure out how to live without you. Isabella was sobbing now, her carefully constructed composure crumbling like sand. I was drowning Daniel. I was so scared, so overwhelmed. Every time they cried, I felt like I was failing them. Every time I looked at them, I saw everything I didn't know how to do, everything I was getting wrong. So you ran, Daniel said flatly. You ran and you left me to drown instead. Yes, Isabella whispered. I ran, and I've regretted it every day since. But not enough to come back. Not enough to call. Not enough to even send a birthday card. Isabella couldn't argue with that. There was no defense for what she had done, no justification that could bridge 5 years of silence. You're right, she said quietly. I failed them completely. I failed you. But Daniel, I'm not that scared girl anymore. I've built something, accomplished things I never thought possible. I've learned to be strong, to make hard decisions, to face challenges head on. I think I might finally be ready to be the mother they deserve. And what if you're wrong? Daniel asked, his voice breaking. What if you decide in 6 months or a year that it's still too hard? What if you leave again because I can't? They can't go through that twice, Isabella. I won't let them. I won't leave, Isabella said fiercely. I swear to you I won't leave again. You swore that before, Daniel replied quietly. On our wedding day, in the hospital when they were born, the night before you walked out. Your promises don't mean much to me anymore. Isabella felt something inside her shatter completely. She had known this conversation would be difficult, but she hadn't been prepared for the depth of Daniel's pain, the years of hurt and anger and betrayal that colored every word. What do you want me to do? She asked desperately. How do I prove to you that I've changed? How do I show you that I'm not going anywhere this time? Daniel was quiet for so long that Isabella thought he might have hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was exhausted. I don't know if you can, he said. I don't know if I'm capable of trusting you again. But Isabella, I'm scared. I'm so fucking scared of what's going to happen to them when I can't take care of them anymore. And despite everything, despite how much I hate what you did to us, you're still their mother. You're still the only family they have besides me. Isabella's heart clenched at the resignation in his voice, the fear that he was trying so hard to hide. Let me help, she pleaded. Let me be there for them, for you. I know I don't deserve another chance, but they deserve to have their mother. Another long silence. Then one meeting, Daniel said finally. Just you and me before you see them. I need to look you in the eye and decide if you're the same selfish woman who walked out on us, or if you've actually become someone who can put their needs first. Isabella's heart leaped with hope. Yes. Anything, when where? Saturday afternoon. There's a coffee shop on 5th Avenue near the Met. Cafe Sabarsky. 2 o'clock. I'll be there, Isabella said immediately. Daniel, thank you. Thank you for giving me this chance. I'm not doing this for you, Daniel said quietly. I'm doing this for them. Because if something happens to me, they're going to need someone. And despite everything, you're still their mother. The line went dead, and Isabella found herself staring at her phone, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. In 3 days, she would see Daniel again. She would look into the eyes of the man she had loved and betrayed and try to convince him that she had become someone worthy of their daughter's love. For the first time in 5 years, Isabella had something more important than a business deal riding on her performance. She had the chance to reclaim the family she had thrown away, to be the mother she had always been too afraid to become. But first, she had to prove to Daniel and to herself that this time she wouldn't run. The 3 days between the phone call and their meeting crawled by with agonizing slowness. Isabella found herself unable to concentrate on anything, her mind constantly drifting to the conversation ahead and all the ways it could go wrong. She canceled 2 major meetings, something she had never done in her professional life, and spent hours staring out her office window at the city below, wondering what Daniel and the girls were doing at that very moment. On Friday night, she stood in her walk-in closet for nearly an hour trying to decide what to wear to meet the man whose life she had destroyed. Everything seemed wrong, too corporate, too casual, too much like she was trying to impress him, or too little like she cared. Finally, she settled on dark jeans and a simple navy sweater clothes that felt like the woman she had been before ambition consumed her soul. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching Isabella's mood perfectly. She woke before dawn, her stomach churning with anxiety, and spent the early hours pacing her apartment like a caged animal. She tried to eat breakfast, but managed only a few sips of coffee before her nervous stomach rebelled. By noon, she was dressed and ready, though their meeting wasn't until 2. She arrived at Cafe Sabarsky 45 minutes early, choosing a corner table where she could see the entrance. The Austrian coffee house was elegant and warm, filled with the scent of pastries and the gentle murmur of weekend conversations. Isabella ordered a coffee she couldn't drink, and watched every person who walked through the door, her heart jumping each time she thought she recognized Daniel's silhouette. At exactly 2 o'clock, he appeared. 5 years had changed him in ways that made Isabella's chest ache. He was thinner than she remembered, his face more angular with lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and endless worry. His dark hair was shot through with silver now, and there was a careful way he moved as if he was already compensating for a body that might betray him. But it was still Daniel, still the man who had held her hand during their first dance, who had cried when the twins were born, who had whispered that he loved her even when she couldn't love herself. He spotted her immediately, their eyes meeting across the crowded cafe. For a moment, neither of them moved, frozen in a tableau of shared history and mutual pain. Then Daniel squared his shoulders and walked toward her table, his expression carefully neutral. "Isabella," he said, as he reached her, not sitting down immediately. "Daniel." She stood as well, unsure of the protocol for greeting the man whose heart you broke. "Thank you for coming." He nodded curtly and took the seat across from her, declining her offer to buy him coffee. Up close, Isabella could see the slight tremor in his left hand that the private investigator had mentioned, and she had to clench her fists to keep from reaching out to him. "You look good," Daniel said after a moment, his tone carefully neutral. "Success suits you." Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I look like I've spent 5 years running from the biggest mistake of my life." "Is that what this is about?" Daniel asked, leaning back in his chair. "Guilt? Some midlife crisis where you suddenly decide you want to play house again?" "No," Isabella said firmly. This is about the fact that I saw my daughters for the first time in 5 years, and I realized that no amount of money or success could fill the hole I carved out of my own heart when I left them. Daniel's jaw tightened. They're not your daughters anymore, Isabella. Biologically, yes, but you forfeited any claim to that title when you walked away. The words hit Isabella like a physical blow, but she forced herself not to flinch. You're right. I know you're right. But I want to earn it back. I want to be their mother if you'll let me try. And what happens when being a mother gets hard again? Daniel asked, his voice rising slightly. What happens when they have nightmares or get sick or need you at 3 a.m? What happens when your board of directors demands you choose between a business trip and a school play? Isabella met his gaze steadily. Then I choose them. Every time I choose them. Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in it. Easy words, Isabella. You said similar things before you left. I was different then, Isabella insisted. I was scared and overwhelmed and I didn't know who I was supposed to be. But I've spent 5 years learning how to be strong, how to make impossible decisions, how to fight for what matters. And what matters to you? Daniel asked quietly. They do. Lily and Grace. They matter more than anything I've ever built or accomplished. And you matter, Daniel. I know I have no right to care about you anymore, but I do. And I know you're facing something terrible, and I can't stand the thought of you going through it alone. Daniel's composure cracked slightly at her words. You don't get to care about me, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You don't get to waltz back into our lives and pretend you still have the right to worry about me. I know I don't have the right, Isabella said, tears starting to blur her vision. But I do anyway. I've cared about you every single day for 5 years. I've wondered if you were happy, if you were healthy, if you ever thought about me at all. I tried not to, Daniel admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. God help me, I tried so hard not to think about you. But every time they asked about their mother, every time they wondered why you left, I thought about you. Every milestone, every achievement, every moment when they needed you and you weren't there, I thought about you. Isabella was crying openly now, not caring who might see. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry, Daniel. I know sorry doesn't fix anything, doesn't change what I did, but I need you to know that leaving you was the worst mistake I've ever made. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. The day you left, he said slowly, the girls cried for hours. They kept asking where Mommy was when you were coming back. I didn't know what to tell them because I didn't understand it myself. I kept thinking you'd call, that you'd come home, that this was just some kind of breakdown that we could work through together. Isabella's heart shattered a little more with each word. After a week, I started calling hospitals thinking maybe something had happened to you. After a month, I hired a lawyer to see if I could have you declared legally missing. It wasn't until the money started showing up in our account that I realized you hadn't been hurt or kidnapped or killed. You had just chosen to leave us. Daniel. Let me finish, he said firmly. I need you to understand what those first months were like. Lily stopped eating for 2 weeks. She would just sit at the kitchen table and cry until she made herself sick. Grace started having accidents again, wetting the bed every night, clinging to me so tightly I couldn't leave the room without her having a panic attack. Isabella covered her face with her hands, unable to bear the images his words created. I was teaching full-time and trying to be both parents, and I was drowning just as much as you said you were. But I didn't have the luxury of running away. I had to figure out how to hold them together when I was falling apart myself. How did you do it? Isabella asked through her tears. Daniel smiled sadly. One day at a time. One diaper change, one bedtime story, one scraped knee at a time. And slowly, very slowly, we learned how to be a family without you. They stopped asking when you were coming home. They stopped crying for their mommy. They started calling me both daddy and mama because I was all they had. The words were like knives in Isabella's chest, each one a reminder of what she had given up, what she had forced Daniel to become. They're amazing girls. Daniel continued, his voice softening. Lily is brilliant. She reads at a 5th grade level and loves astronomy. She wants to be an astronaut when she grows up. Grace is an artist, always drawing and painting, seeing beauty in everything around her. They're kind and funny and resilient, and they've never known a day when they weren't loved completely. Because of you, Isabella said quietly. Because they deserved it, Daniel replied. Because that's what you do for your children. You love them even when it's hard, even when you're exhausted, even when you don't know what you're doing. You show up. Isabella nodded, understanding the weight of his words, the accusation embedded in them. I know I failed them, she said. I know I failed you, but I'm asking for a chance to show up now. Not to replace what you've built, not to disrupt their lives, but to add to it. To be part of their story instead of just a painful chapter they've moved past. Daniel studied her face for a long moment, searching for something Isabella couldn't name. Why now? He asked finally. Why after 5 years of silence are you suddenly ready to be a mother? Isabella took a shaky breath. Because I saw them laughing with you in the park, and I realized that every success I've achieved means nothing if I can't share it with the people I love most. Because I know you're sick, and the thought of them losing you the way they lost me is unbearable. Because I'm finally strong enough to put their needs before my own fear. And if I say no, Daniel asked, if I decide that the risk of you leaving again isn't worth the potential benefit of having you in their lives, Isabella felt her heart stop. She hadn't considered that possibility, hadn't allowed herself to think that Daniel might simply refuse to let her back into their lives. Then I'll respect your decision, she said quietly. But I'll also fight for them in every legal way I can. Not to take them from you, never that, but to be part of their lives. They're my daughters too, Daniel, no matter what I've done. And I think they deserve the chance to know their mother. Daniel's expression hardened slightly. You'd take me to court. Only if you force me to, Isabella said. I'd rather work with you, be part of the family you've built instead of trying to tear it apart. But if you won't let me try to earn their love, then yes, I'll fight for the right to try. They stared at each other across the small table, years of hurt and anger and love crackling between them like electricity. Isabella could see Daniel weighing her words, calculating the risks and benefits of letting her back into their carefully constructed world. If I agree to this, Daniel said slowly, there have to be rules, boundaries. I won't have you disrupting their lives on a whim. Isabella's heart leaped with hope. Anything, whatever you think is best for them. First, you don't tell them who you are right away. They know they have a mother who went away, but they've built their lives around the idea that it's just the 3 of us. I won't have you showing up and destroying their sense of security. Isabella nodded quickly. Of course. However you want to handle it. Second, you prove yourself before you ask for anything from them. You show up consistently, you put their needs first. You demonstrate that you're committed to being in their lives for the long term. No sudden disappearances, no canceled plans because work comes up. I understand. Third, Daniel's voice became harder, more protective. The first time you hurt them, the first time you let them down or make them feel abandoned, you're gone. permanently. I won't give you a second chance to break their hearts." Isabella felt the weight of his ultimatum settle on her shoulders. One mistake, one moment of weakness, and she would lose them forever. It should have terrified her, but instead she felt oddly calm. She had spent 5 years learning how to meet impossible challenges, how to succeed when failure wasn't an option. This was just another test, the most important one of her life. "I won't let them down," she said firmly. "I won't let you down." Daniel searched her face again, looking for signs of the woman who had walked away 5 years ago. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he nodded slowly. "We start small," he said. "A few hours on Saturday afternoons. You can be a friend of mine, someone who wants to spend time with them. If that goes well, if they're comfortable with you, we'll figure out the next step." Isabella wanted to protest, wanted to demand immediate recognition as their mother, but she bit back the words. This wasn't about what she wanted. It was about what was best for Lily and Grace. "When can I see them?" she asked. "Next Saturday. There's a children's museum in Brooklyn that they love. We can meet there, spend a couple hours together. See how it goes." Isabella nodded, her hands shaking slightly as she reached for her purse. "Daniel, I want you to know that I don't expect anything from you. I know I hurt you in ways that can probably never be healed, but I hope that maybe in time we can find a way to be friends again. For their sake." Daniel's expression softened slightly. "Isabella, I loved you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. When you left, it nearly destroyed me. I don't know if I can ever forgive you completely, but I'm willing to try. For their sake, like you said." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 5 years settling between them like a physical presence. "Can I ask you something?" Isabella said finally. Daniel nodded. "Are you scared about the diagnosis, about what it means for them?" Daniel's facade of composure cracked, and for a moment Isabella saw the frightened man behind the protective father. "Terrified," he admitted. "I lie awake at night wondering what's going to happen to them when I can't take care of them anymore. The disease, it's going to take everything from me eventually. My motor skills, my ability to speak clearly, my memories. I'm going to become someone they don't recognize, and then I'm going to die and leave them alone." Isabella reached across the table without thinking, covering his trembling hand with hers. To her surprise, he didn't pull away. "They won't be alone," she said fiercely. "Whatever happens, however this plays out between us, I swear to you that they will never be alone." Daniel looked down at their joined hands, and Isabella saw a tear slip down his cheek. "I used to hate you," he said quietly. "For leaving, for making me do this alone, for taking away their chance to have a mother. But sitting here now, seeing you cry for them, hearing you talk about putting them first, I think maybe I just hated that I still loved you, despite everything you'd done." Isabella's breath caught in her throat. "Daniel, I'm not saying I'm ready to forgive you," he said quickly, pulling his hand away. "I'm not saying we can ever be what we were. Too much has happened, too much trust has been broken. But maybe we can find a way to co-parent, to give them the stability they'll need when I can't provide it anymore." Isabella nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "I should go," Daniel said, standing up from the table. "I told my neighbor I'd only be gone for an hour, and the girls will be expecting me for dinner." "Of course," Isabella said, standing as well. "Next Saturday, then. What time should I meet you at the museum?" 10 o'clock. It's the Brooklyn Children's Museum on St. Mark's Avenue." And Isabella, "Yes, don't make me regret this. Don't make them pay for my decision to let you try again." Isabella met his gaze steadily. "I won't. I promise you I won't." Daniel nodded and turned to leave, but Isabella called out to him one more time. "Daniel, What do they like? What are they interested in? I want to know everything about them. Daniel paused, and for the first time since he'd sat down, Isabella saw a genuine smile cross his face. Lily loves anything to do with space, he said. She has glow-in-the-dark stars on her ceiling and knows the names of all the planets and most of the constellations. Grace is obsessed with art. She draws constantly and has filled probably 20 sketchbooks in the last year. They both love animals, especially dogs, though our landlord doesn't allow pets. Isabella filed away every detail, already planning ways to connect with each girl's interests. And they both love stories, Daniel continued. I read to them every night before bed. It's the one part of our routine that's never changed since they were babies. What are you reading now? Isabella asked. The Chronicles of Narnia. We just started The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Lily keeps asking if Aslan is real, and Grace wants to draw pictures of all the characters. Isabella smiled, remembering her own childhood love of those books. I used to have dreams about finding my own wardrobe that led to Narnia. So did I, Daniel said softly, and for a moment the years fell away, and they were just two people who had once shared everything, including their dreams. Then reality reasserted itself, and Daniel's expression became guarded again. I'll see you Saturday, he said, and this time he didn't look back as he walked away. Isabella remained standing beside the table long after he had disappeared into the crowd, outside her heart pounding, with a mixture of hope and terror. In exactly 1 week, she would meet her daughters. Not as their mother, not yet, but as a stranger trying to earn the right to love them. She thought about Lily's love of astronomy, and Grace's artistic talent about bedtime stories, and glow-in-the-dark stars, and the children who had learned to call their father both Daddy and Mama because he was all they had. For the first time in 5 years, Isabella had something more important than a board meeting to prepare for. She had 7 days to figure out how to be worthy of 2 little girls who had every reason to reject her and no reason to trust her. As she walked through the streets of Manhattan toward her empty penthouse, Isabella made a mental list of everything she needed to do before Saturday. She would buy books about space exploration and art supplies fit for a young artist. She would research child psychology and learn how to talk to 7-year-olds without terrifying them. She would prepare herself for the possibility that they might hate her on sight, and for the even more terrifying possibility that they might not. But most importantly, she would ready herself to love them the way Daniel had loved them every day for 5 years, completely unconditionally, and without expecting anything in return. The next week would either be the beginning of her redemption or the final confirmation of her failure as a mother. Either way, Isabella was determined to face it with the same courage and determination that had built her empire. After all, everything she had ever accomplished had been practice for this moment, the chance to fight for the love of her children and earn her place in the family she had abandoned. The rain had started again by the time Isabella reached her building, but she barely noticed it. Her mind was already at the Brooklyn Children's Museum, imagining the moment when she would see Lily and Grace up close, when she would hear their voices, and maybe, if she was very lucky, make them smile. 1 week. 7 days to prepare for the most important meeting of her life. Isabella had conquered boardrooms filled with hostile executives, built a company worth billions, and earned a reputation as one of the most formidable businesswomen in America. But none of that had prepared her for the challenge of winning the hearts of 2 7-year-old girls who had learned to live without their mother. As the elevator carried her up to her penthouse, Isabella closed her eyes and tried to imagine what it would feel like to hear her daughters call her mom again. It was a sound she hadn't heard in over 5 years, a title she had forfeited when she walked away from the hardest job she'd ever been asked to do. Now finally, she had the chance to earn it back. The week that followed crawled by with excruciating slowness each day, stretching endlessly, as Isabella prepared for the most important meeting of her life. She had faced down Fortune 500 CEOs and negotiated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, but the thought of spending 2 hours with her own daughters left her paralyzed with anxiety. She spent Monday researching everything she could about 7-year-old development, reading articles about child psychology until her eyes burned. Tuesday was devoted to shopping, not her usual efficient power shopping for designer suits, but wandering through toy stores and bookshops like a lost tourist in a foreign country. She bought a telescope for Lily, then second-guessed herself and exchanged it for a book about constellations, then exchanged that for a model of the solar system that glowed in the dark. For Grace, she selected an expensive set of art supplies, complete with professional-grade colored pencils and watercolor paints. Then she worried that it was too much, too presumptuous, and bought a simple sketchbook instead. By Thursday, her penthouse looked like a toy store had exploded, filled with carefully chosen and subsequently abandoned gifts that all seemed inadequate for the enormity of what she was trying to accomplish. Friday night found Isabella standing in front of her bathroom mirror at 3 a.m, practicing conversations with 2 children she had never really known. "Hi, girls. I'm Isabella. I'm a friend of your daddy's." The words sounded stilted and artificial even to her own ears. She tried again. "Hey there. Your dad told me so much about you both." Better, but still wrong somehow. She had commanded respect in boardrooms across 3 continents, but she had no idea how to talk to a 7-year-old about her love of astronomy or her artistic dreams. The realization that she knew more about the quarterly earnings reports of companies she'd never worked for than she did about her own children's favorite colors left her feeling hollow and inadequate. Saturday morning arrived gray and humid, the kind of oppressive August day that made the city feel like a pressure cooker. Isabella had been awake since 5, changing outfits 3 times before settling on dark jeans and a soft green blouse that Daniel had once said brought out her eyes. She told herself she wasn't dressing for him, but the lie felt thin even as she applied the same lipstick she'd worn on their first date 12 years ago. The subway ride to Brooklyn was a nightmare of anxiety and second-guessing. Isabella, who owned 3 cars and employed a full-time driver, had chosen public transportation because she wanted to arrive the same way Daniel and the girls would. It was a small gesture, but everything felt significant now. Every choice weighted with the possibility of getting it right or catastrophically wrong. She emerged from the subway at Eastern Parkway 20 minutes early and walked the remaining blocks to the Brooklyn Children's Museum, her palms sweating, despite the morning chill. The museum was housed in a converted building that looked warm and welcoming, nothing like the sterile corporate environments where Isabella spent most of her time. She stood across the street for 10 minutes, watching families stream in and out of the entrance, mothers holding hands with excited children, fathers carrying sleepy toddlers, siblings racing ahead while parents called out warnings to be careful. All the ordinary magic of family life that Isabella had walked away from and was now desperately trying to reclaim. At exactly 10 o'clock, she saw them. Daniel appeared first, looking tired but patient, as he shepherded 2 small figures through the museum's entrance. Even from across the street, Isabella could see that the past week had taken a toll on him. His movements were more careful than she remembered, and there was a slight tremor in his left hand as he held the door open. But it was the girls who stole Isabella's breath completely. Lily had grown tall for her age, all legs and elbows, with Isabella's dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore jeans and a NASA t-shirt, and she was talking animatedly to Daniel about something that required elaborate hand gestures. Grace was smaller, more delicate, with Daniel's lighter brown hair escaping from 2 braids and a paint-stained smock over her dress. She carried a worn sketchbook clutched against her chest like a shield. They were beautiful. More than beautiful, they were real and alive, and hers these two small people she had carried and birthed, and then abandoned before they were old enough to understand why. Isabella's legs felt unsteady as she crossed the street and approached the museum entrance. Through the glass doors she could see Daniel checking their membership cards, while the girls bounced with anticipation beside him. This was it, the moment she had been dreading and longing for in equal measure. She pushed open the door, and Daniel looked up immediately, as if he had been watching for her. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and she saw her own anxiety reflected in his face. Then he turned to the girls with forced casualness. "Hey girls, remember I told you we might see my friend Isabella today? Well, there she is." Two pairs of eyes turned toward Isabella, and the world seemed to stop spinning. Lily's gaze was direct and assessing, with an intelligence that reminded Isabella painfully of herself at that age. Grace seemed shyer, half hiding behind Daniel, while peeking out with curious brown eyes. "Hi." Isabella managed her voice barely above a whisper. Up close, the resemblance was unmistakable. Lily had Isabella's stubborn chin, and Grace had her delicate hands. These were her children, her babies who had grown into real people while she was building an empire out of ambition and regret. "Hi," Lily said politely, while Grace remained silent behind Daniel's legs. Daniel cleared his throat. "Isabella, I'd like you to meet Lily and Grace. Girls, this is Ms. Hayes. She works in the city, and she wanted to spend some time with us today." Isabella knelt down to bring herself closer to their eye level, a gesture that felt both natural and terrifying. "It's so nice to meet you both. Your dad has told me wonderful things about you." "Are you really rich?" Lily asked bluntly, making Daniel wince with embarrassment. "Lily," he warned gently, but Isabella laughed, surprised by the directness of the question. "I suppose I am. Does that matter?" Lily considered this seriously. "Not really. I was just curious because Daddy said you work with money and big companies. Do you like your job?" The question was so earnest, so genuinely interested, that Isabella felt her heart clench. "I used to think I loved it," she said honestly. "But lately I've been wondering if there are more important things than work." "Like what?" Grace asked softly, speaking for the first time. Her voice was small and sweet with just a hint of Daniel's gentle cadence. Isabella looked at both girls, then up at Daniel, who was watching the interaction with careful attention. "Like spending time with people you care about. Like learning new things and going on adventures. Like making art or studying the stars." Grace's eyes widened with interest. "You know about art." "A little," Isabella said. "I used to love to draw when I was your age. I wasn't very good at it, but I loved the way it felt to create something that wasn't there before." "I can show you my sketchbook if you want," Grace offered shyly, clutching it tighter against her chest. "I would love that," Isabella said, and meant it completely. Daniel stepped forward clearly, ready to move things along before the moment became too intense. "Should we head inside? I thought we could start with the space exhibit, since Lily's been talking about it all week." They made their way through the museum's colorful corridors, the girls chattering about their favorite exhibits, while Isabella tried to absorb every detail. Lily walked slightly ahead, pointing out different displays and explaining them with the confidence of someone who had been here many times before. Grace stayed closer to Daniel, but kept glancing back at Isabella with growing curiosity. The space exhibit was a wonderland of interactive displays and hands-on activities designed to make astronomy accessible to young minds. Lily immediately gravitated toward a scale model of the solar system, beginning an animated explanation of planetary orbits that demonstrated a remarkable grasp of complex concepts. "Did you know that it would take over 9 years to walk to the moon?" she told Isabella earnestly. "And that's if you could walk in a straight line, which you can't, because there's no air in space." "That's amazing," Isabella said, and she genuinely meant it. "How did you learn so much about space?" "Books mostly," Lily said, launching into a detailed description of her favorite astronomy texts. "Daddy takes me to the library every Wednesday, and I always check out the same section. The librarian, Mrs. Rodriguez, saves the new space books for me." Isabella felt a pang of loss so sharp it was physical. 5 years of Wednesday library trips, 5 years of watching her daughter's passion develop, 5 years of bedtime conversations about planets and stars and the infinite possibilities of the universe. All of it missed, all of it irretrievable. But Lily was still talking, still sharing her enthusiasm with infectious joy, and Isabella forced herself to focus on the present rather than the past she couldn't change. "What's your favorite planet?" Isabella asked. "Saturn," Lily replied immediately. "Because of the rings. They're made of ice and rock and they're so beautiful. If I could visit any planet, it would definitely be Saturn." "Even though you couldn't breathe there." Lily grinned, the expression so reminiscent of Daniel that Isabella's heart ached. "I'd bring a really good spacesuit." Meanwhile, Grace had found a corner where children could create their own constellation maps, carefully drawing lines between star stickers to form new patterns in the sky. Isabella watched her work with quiet concentration, her small tongue poking out slightly as she focused on getting each line exactly right. "What are you making?" Isabella asked gently, not wanting to interrupt, but desperate to connect. "A new constellation," Grace said, without looking up. "I'm calling it the family constellation because it looks like 3 people holding hands." Isabella's throat tightened as she looked at the drawing. 3 figures indeed, connected by carefully drawn lines, standing together against the vast darkness of space. "It's beautiful," Isabella whispered. "You can have it if you want," Grace said, suddenly tearing the paper carefully from the pad and offering it to Isabella. "I can make another one." Isabella accepted the drawing with trembling hands, understanding that she was being offered something far more precious than any business deal she had ever negotiated. "Thank you, Grace. I'll treasure this." Grace beamed, and Isabella saw herself in that smile, not the corporate shark she had become, but the dreamy artistic child she had once been, before ambition hardened her heart. They spent the next hour moving through different exhibits, and Isabella found herself relaxing despite her nerves. The girls were easy to be around, curious and funny, and surprisingly willing to include her in their ongoing conversation. Lily peppered her with questions about everything from her favorite constellation to whether she had ever seen a real rocket launch. Grace showed her a dozen sketches from her ever-present sketchbook, each one revealing a remarkable talent for capturing emotion and movement in simple lines. Daniel remained mostly quiet, watching the interactions with careful attention, but allowing the girls to lead the conversation. Isabella caught him smiling once when Grace dissolved into giggles at something Isabella said about her own failed attempts at watercolor painting. "I tried to paint a sunset once," Isabella confessed, "and it ended up looking like a hamburger with French fries." Grace laughed so hard she snorted, which made Lily start laughing too, and suddenly Isabella found herself surrounded by the most beautiful sound in the world, her daughter's laughter. When they reached the museum's art studio, Grace practically vibrated with excitement. The space was set up for a drop-in workshop on printmaking, and Grace immediately began explaining the process to Isabella with the confidence of someone who had tried every art technique available. "You roll the ink on the plate like this," she demonstrated, and then you put the paper on top and run it through the press. The picture comes out backwards from what you drew, but that's part of the magic. Isabella watched her daughter work with practiced ease, her small hands competent and sure, as she created something beautiful from nothing. This was Grace's element, the place where she felt most confident and alive. "Would you like to try?" Grace asked, offering Isabella a clean plate. "I'm not very artistic," Isabella warned. "That's okay," Grace said seriously. "Art isn't about being good at it. It's about putting your feelings on the paper." The wisdom of the statement coming from a 7-year-old left Isabella momentarily speechless. She accepted the plate and began sketching with the provided stylus, trying to capture something simple but meaningful. What emerged was rough and amateurish, but it was recognizable: 2 small figures standing under a starry sky. "Is that me and Lily?" Grace asked, leaning in to look. "I think so," Isabella said. "You're looking up at the stars together." Grace studied the drawing intently. "It's really good. You should add Daddy, too." Isabella glanced over at Daniel, who was helping Lily with her own print nearby. "Do you think he'd fit? Family pictures always have room for everyone," Grace said matter-of-factly, and Isabella felt her heart break and heal simultaneously at the casual way her daughter included her in the definition of family. They worked together in comfortable silence, Grace offering gentle suggestions, while Isabella struggled with the unfamiliar medium. When they ran their papers through the press together, Isabella felt a surge of pride at the simple image that emerged, imperfect but heartfelt, a moment captured in ink and hope. "Can I keep this one?" Grace asked, looking at Isabella's print. "Of course," Isabella said, then hesitated. "But why would you want it? It's not very good." Grace looked at her with the solemn seriousness that seemed to come naturally to both twins. "Because you made it for me and Lily. That makes it special." Isabella had to excuse herself to the bathroom, where she cried for 5 minutes while staring at her reflection in the harsh fluorescent light. These children, these remarkable little people she had abandoned, were offering her grace and acceptance she hadn't earned and didn't deserve. The weight of what she had given up, what she had put them through, felt crushing and liberating at the same time. When she returned, they were in the museum's cafe sharing a large pretzel and debating the relative merits of different dinosaur species. Isabella slid into the booth beside Grace, who immediately scooted closer to show her a new sketch she had started. "It's you," Grace said shyly. "I draw people I like." The sketch was simple but recognizable: a woman with long dark hair and kind eyes smiling. Isabella looked nothing like that in real life, she knew. The corporate shark who terrorized boardrooms bore little resemblance to the gentle figure in Grace's drawing. But maybe this was who she could become, who she wanted to be for these children. "Thank you," Isabella said softly. "I love it." Lily had been relatively quiet during the art activities, but now she leaned forward with renewed energy. "Do you know any stories about space?" she asked Isabella. "A few," Isabella said, thinking of all the science fiction she had devoured as a child. "Do you want to hear about the time astronauts discovered a planet made entirely of ice cream?" Lily's eyes widened with delight. "That's not real, is it?" "Maybe not," Isabella said with exaggerated seriousness. "But can you imagine if it was? What flavor do you think the oceans would be?" "Strawberry," Grace said immediately. "Cookies and cream," Lily countered. "And the mountains. Rocky Road," they said in unison, dissolving into giggles at the perfect appropriateness of the flavor. Isabella found herself spinning an elaborate tale about the ice cream planet, complete with rivers of hot fudge and forests of candy canes. The girls hung on every word, adding their own details and suggestions, building the fantasy world together. Daniel watched from across the table, and Isabella caught something that might have been approval in his expression. When it was time to leave, Isabella felt a familiar panic rising in her chest. She wasn't ready for this to end, wasn't ready to return to her empty penthouse and wait another week for the chance to see them again. "This was really fun," Lily said politely as they gathered their things. "Will we see you again?" Isabella looked at Daniel, not wanting to make promises she couldn't keep. "I hope so," she said carefully. "If your dad says it's okay." "Can she come to dinner sometime?" Grace asked Daniel directly. "I want to show her my other drawings." Daniel hesitated, and Isabella could see him weighing the request against his protective instincts. "We'll see," he said finally. "Maybe next weekend we can all do something together again." Outside the museum, they stood in an awkward cluster while other families dispersed around them. Isabella wanted to hug her daughters goodbye, but didn't know if she had earned that right yet. Instead, she knelt down again and looked at each girl seriously. "Thank you for sharing your day with me," she said. "I had more fun than I've had in a very long time." "Me too," Grace said, then surprised everyone by stepping forward and wrapping her small arms around Isabella's neck in a quick, fierce hug. Isabella closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of her daughter's sunshine and art supplies, and something indefinably sweet. When Grace pulled away, Isabella had to blink back tears. Lily was more reserved but offered a friendly handshake that made Isabella smile despite the formality. "It was nice meeting you, Ms. Hayes. I hope you come back next week." "So do I," Isabella said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. She watched them walk away down the street, Grace skipping slightly while she talked animatedly to Daniel about something Isabella couldn't hear. Lily walked more sedately, but kept looking back and waving until they turned the corner and disappeared. Isabella stood alone on the sidewalk for several minutes, clutching Grace's constellation drawing and trying to process what had just happened. For 3 hours, she had been part of their world. Not as their mother, not yet, but as someone they liked, someone they wanted to see again. It was more than she had dared to hope for, and less than she desperately wanted. But it was a beginning. The subway ride back to Manhattan passed in a blur of replayed conversations and mental snapshots. Grace's shy smile when she offered her drawing, Lily's animated explanation of planetary orbits, the sound of their laughter when she told them about the hamburger sunset, the casual way Grace had suggested adding Daniel to the family picture, as if there had never been any question that he belonged. Back in her penthouse, Isabella carefully pinned Grace's constellation drawing to her refrigerator, the first personal item that had graced the sterile surface in 5 years. She put Grace's sketch of her on her bedside table, where she could see it first thing in the morning and last thing at night. Then she sat on her couch and called the office to cancel all her meetings for the following week. Her assistant, a ruthlessly efficient woman named Patricia, who had never questioned Isabella's priorities before, sounded shocked. "All of them." "But what about the Morrison acquisition and the Tokyo conference call? Reschedule everything," Isabella said firmly. "I have more important things to focus on right now." "More important than—" "Yes," Isabella said, cutting her off. "Much more important." After she hung up, Isabella found herself looking at her reflection in the black screen of her television. She looked the same as she had that morning, successful, polished, in control. But something fundamental had shifted inside her chest, some long-frozen part of her heart beginning to thaw. For the first time in 5 years, Isabella had something worth fighting for that couldn't be measured in quarterly earnings or stock prices. She had 2 daughters who might someday learn to love her, and a chance to be the mother she had been too scared to become. The phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. Daniel's name appeared on the screen, and Isabella's heart rate immediately spiked. "Hello?" It's me, Daniel said, his voice careful and neutral. I wanted to talk about today. Isabella's stomach dropped. Did I do something wrong? Were they uncomfortable? I can do better. I just need... Isabella, stop, Daniel said gently. You did fine. Better than fine, actually. They liked you. Isabella felt weak with relief. They did. Grace hasn't stopped talking about you since we got home. She wants to make you a proper portrait, apparently. And Lily asked if you really knew about space or if you were just being nice. What did you tell her? The truth, that you're very smart, and that when you care about something, you learn everything you can about it. Isabella felt the weight of that statement, the implication that Daniel believed she truly cared about their daughters. I do care, she said quietly, more than I knew how to care about anything 5 years ago. I can see that, Daniel said, which is why I'm calling. They want to see you again, and honestly, so do I. Not for me, he added quickly, but because I think it might be good for them to have another adult in their lives who they can trust. Isabella's heart began to race. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe we can try having dinner together next Friday. Nothing fancy, just mac and cheese and whatever vegetables I can trick them into eating. You can see what our normal life is like and they can get used to having you around. Isabella closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. Are you sure? No, Daniel said honestly. I'm not sure about anything anymore, but I'm willing to try if you are. Yes, Isabella said immediately. Yes, I want to try. Friday at 6 then. I'll text you the address, though I think you probably already know it. Isabella winced, remembering the private investigator's report. Daniel, about that. We'll talk about boundaries later, he said firmly. For now, let's just focus on them. After he hung up, Isabella sat in her empty apartment and tried to imagine what Friday would bring. Dinner with her daughters in the home Daniel had built for them, the apartment she had walked away from 5 years ago. She would see their bedrooms, their toys, the life they had constructed without her. It would be wonderful and heartbreaking in equal measure, but Isabella was ready for both. She had spent 5 years running from the most important job of her life. Now, finally, she was ready to come home. The week between Saturday's museum visit and Friday's dinner invitation stretched endlessly before Isabella, each day marked by an anticipation so intense it felt physical. She found herself checking her phone constantly, hoping for updates from Daniel, or perhaps a text with some small detail about the girls' week. None came, and Isabella had to remind herself that she was still earning her place in their lives, not yet entitled to the daily rhythms of their world. She spent the time trying to understand what normal family dinners looked like, a concept that felt as foreign to her as ancient hieroglyphics. Her own childhood had been a series of formal meals with her workaholic parents, conversations limited to academic achievements and future career prospects. As an adult, she ate most of her meals alone, or at business dinners where every word was calculated for maximum strategic impact. But mac and cheese with 7-year-olds, Isabella had no frame of reference for that. She found herself in a Barnes & Noble on Wednesday evening, standing in the parenting section like a lost tourist. Books with titles like Talking to Your School-Age Child and Creating Meaningful Family Connections surrounded her, their cheerful covers mocking her complete lack of maternal instinct. She bought 3 of them, then felt ridiculous carrying them to the checkout counter. What kind of mother needed instruction manuals to have dinner with her own children? The kind who had walked away when they needed her most. Isabella reminded herself with characteristic brutal honesty. Thursday night found her standing in her kitchen, attempting to make mac and cheese from scratch. She had never cooked anything more complicated than coffee, relying on her housekeeper for meals when she bothered to eat at home at all. The results were predictably disastrous, a pot of orange glue that bore no resemblance to food. After her third failed attempt, Isabella gave up and ordered takeout from her usual restaurant, eating alone while staring at Grace's constellation, drawing on her refrigerator. Friday arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that made Brooklyn feel like a different world from Manhattan's gleaming towers. Isabella had changed clothes 4 times before settling on dark jeans and a soft blue sweater clothes that felt like a costume for the role she was desperately trying to learn. She carried a small bag containing carefully chosen gifts, a book about female astronomers for Lily, and a set of watercolor pencils for Grace. Simple presents that she hoped struck the right balance between thoughtful and not overly presumptuous. The address Daniel had texted led her to a converted brownstone in Prospect Heights, its red brick facade weathered but welcoming. Isabella stood on the sidewalk for several minutes, gathering her courage while watching other residents come and go. Young families, mostly parents pushing strollers or walking dogs. People living the ordinary lives that Isabella had traded for boardroom victories and quarterly profits. Apartment 3B, Daniel had texted. 3rd floor, blue door. Isabella climbed the narrow staircase, her heart hammering against her ribs with each step. The building smelled like cooking food and old wood. Lived-in scents that spoke of home in ways her sterile penthouse never could. She could hear voices and laughter from behind various doors, families sharing their evening routines, without any awareness that their ordinary happiness was exactly what Isabella had been searching for without knowing it. She stood outside the blue door for a full minute before finding the courage to knock. The sound echoed in the narrow hallway, followed immediately by the thunder of small feet running toward the door. "I'll get it," Grace's voice called out, followed by Daniel's gentle correction. "Remember what we talked about. Let me answer the door." Isabella heard the sound of locks being turned, and then the door opened to reveal Daniel looking tired, but genuinely pleased to see her. Behind him, 2 small faces peered around his legs with barely contained excitement. "Isabella," Daniel said warmly. "Come in. We're just finishing up the cooking." The apartment was smaller than Isabella had expected, but filled with warmth and life in ways that her vast penthouse could never achieve. Children's artwork covered the refrigerator, and most of one wall a testament to Grace's prolific creativity. Lily's books were stacked on every available surface, and a telescope stood by the living room window, pointed toward the gray sky. The space was tidy, but lived in every corner, telling the story of a family that had built their happiness from love rather than money. "Ms. Hayes!" Grace ran forward and wrapped her arms around Isabella's waist in an enthusiastic hug that caught her completely off guard. Isabella had to blink back sudden tears at the casual affection, the way her daughter seemed to have decided that Isabella was someone worth trusting. "Hi, sweetheart." Isabella managed her voice thick with emotion. "I brought you something small." Grace's eyes lit up as Isabella handed her the watercolor pencils, while Lily accepted her book with the serious attention of someone who understood the weight of a good gift. Both girls thanked her politely, but Isabella could see the genuine pleasure in their faces. "Dinner's almost ready," Daniel said, leading her toward the small kitchen where something smelled absolutely wonderful. "I hope you like homemade mac and cheese. It's about the only thing I can make that they'll eat without complaint." Isabella laughed, remembering her own disastrous attempts. "I tried making it myself this week. Let's just say your culinary skills are safe from any competition from me." "Really?" Lily looked up from examining her new book. "You tried to cook for us?" The innocent question hit Isabella like a physical blow. The casual assumption that she might care enough to practice cooking for them. "I wanted to understand what you like," she said simply. Daddy makes the best mac and cheese in the world, Grace declared with the absolute certainty of childhood. He puts special cheese in it and little pieces of ham. It's nothing fancy, Daniel said, but Isabella could see the quiet pride in his face. He had learned to be both father and mother to these children, mastering all the small skills that made a house feel like home. The kitchen was warm and filled with steam from the boiling pasta, and Isabella found herself assigned to simple tasks, setting the table, filling water glasses, carrying bowls to the small dining area. It was domestic in a way she had never experienced this choreography of family dinner preparation. Daniel moved around the small space with practiced efficiency, while the girls chattered about their day at school and asked Isabella questions about everything from her favorite color to whether she had ever seen a real movie star. I went to a movie premiere once, Isabella told them as they gathered around the small table. But I was so nervous that I spilled sauce on my dress before I met any actors. Grace giggled. What kind of sauce? Tomato sauce. It looked like I'd been in a food fight. Did you get in trouble? Lily asked with concern. Only with myself, Isabella said. I learned that sometimes it's better to be authentically messy than perfectly fake. Daniel caught her eye across the table, and she saw something that might have been approval in his expression. They were small moments, these glimpses of understanding, but they felt precious to Isabella. The mac and cheese was indeed the best Isabella had ever tasted, rich and creamy with perfectly cooked pasta and small pieces of ham that the girls picked out with surgical precision. Isabella watched her daughters eat, memorizing the way Grace hummed quietly while she chewed, and how Lily organized her food into neat sections on her plate. Tell us about your job, Lily said suddenly. Daddy says you run a really big company. Isabella found herself explaining Nexus Technologies in 7-year-old terms, talking about how computers and phones work together to help people communicate across the world. The girls listened with genuine interest, asking questions that revealed their natural curiosity and intelligence. Do you have a lot of people who work for you? Grace asked. About 3,000, Isabella said. Grace's eyes widened. That's more people than in our whole school. Do you know all their names? No, Isabella admitted, feeling suddenly ashamed of that fact. Shouldn't I? Daddy knows everyone at his school, Lily said. Even the janitor and the lunch ladies. He says everyone's important. Isabella looked at Daniel, seeing the man who had raised these thoughtful, generous children with values that her corporate world had never taught her. Your daddy's right, she said quietly. Everyone is important. After dinner, the girls showed Isabella around their apartment with the pride of young homeowners. Grace's side of the bedroom they shared was a riot of color and creativity, every surface covered with drawings and paintings and craft projects. Lily's side was neater, her books organized by subject, and her star charts hung with mathematical precision on the wall above her bed. This is where Daddy reads to us every night, Grace explained, pointing to a comfortable chair positioned between their beds. We're reading about Narnia right now. Do you know about Narnia? Lily asked Isabella hopefully. I loved those books when I was your age, Isabella said. Which one are you reading? The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Grace said. We just got to the part where they meet Mr. Tumnus. That's one of my favorite parts, Isabella said. Mr. Tumnus is so lonely until the children find him. Like us, Grace said matter-of-factly. We were lonely before you came. The simple statement hit Isabella like a physical blow. She had been so focused on her own guilt and longing that she hadn't considered how her absence might have left a hole in their lives, an awareness that something was missing, even if they couldn't name what it was. Were you really lonely? Isabella asked gently. Sometimes, Lily said thoughtfully. Other kids have mommies and we just had daddy. He's really good at being a daddy, but he can't do girl things very well. Like braiding hair, Grace added. Daddy tries, but it never looks right. Isabella's throat tightened as she imagined Daniel struggling with unfamiliar feminine territory, doing his best to be everything these girls needed while carrying the weight of her absence. Maybe I could teach him, Isabella said carefully, or help with girl things sometimes if you'd like that. Both girls brightened immediately. Would you really, Grace asked. I'd love to, Isabella said, meaning it completely. They spent the next hour in the living room, Grace showing Isabella her latest art projects, while Lily demonstrated her telescope and explained the constellations visible from their window. Isabella found herself relaxing into the rhythm of family evening, the comfortable chaos of children sharing their passions with someone who was genuinely interested. Look, Lily said, adjusting the telescope's focus. You can see Jupiter tonight. It's that bright dot right there. Isabella peered through the eyepiece, marveling at the distant planet that looked impossibly clear and close. It's beautiful, she said. How did you learn to use this so well? Daddy got it for me last Christmas, Lily explained. We set it up together and now I can find most of the planets and lots of constellations. She's teaching me too, Grace added. I like to draw the patterns the stars make. Isabella watched her daughters work together, sharing knowledge and supporting each other's interests, with a generosity that spoke to the values Daniel had instilled in them. They were remarkable children, kind and curious, and confident in ways that Isabella had never been at their age. When 8 o'clock arrived, Daniel announced bedtime with the gentle firmness of someone who had learned that consistency was key to successful parenting. The girls protested mildly, but began their bedtime routines without real resistance. Can Isabella read with us tonight? Grace asked hopefully. Isabella looked at Daniel, not wanting to overstep, but desperately hoping he would say yes. This felt like a threshold, an invitation into the most sacred part of their family routine. Daniel hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. If she'd like to. They gathered in the girls' bedroom, Daniel in his usual chair, while Isabella sat cross-legged on the floor between the beds. The chapter they read that night was about the children's first glimpse of Aslan, the great lion who represented everything good and powerful in Narnia. Isabella found herself caught up in the story, despite having read it countless times, seeing it fresh through her daughter's eyes. Do you think Aslan is real? Grace asked when Daniel closed the book. Not the way a regular lion is real, Isabella said thoughtfully, but maybe real in the way that love is real, or courage, or the feeling you get when someone forgives you for something terrible you've done. Lily considered this seriously. Like how Santa Claus isn't real, but Christmas magic is exactly like that, Isabella said, impressed by her daughter's wisdom. Daniel tucked them in with practiced efficiency, kissing foreheads and adjusting blankets, and answering last-minute requests for water or bathroom trips. Isabella watched the ritual with fascination, seeing the hundreds of small acts of love that made up daily parenting. Good night, Isabella, Grace said sleepily. Will you come back tomorrow? Isabella's heart clenched at the casual way her daughter assumed she would want to return the trust implicit in the question. Not tomorrow, sweetheart, but soon. If your daddy says it's okay. It's okay, Lily said firmly. You're part of our family now. The words hung in the air like a benediction, and Isabella had to excuse herself to the bathroom to compose herself before she could say goodnight properly. In the living room afterward, Daniel poured 2 glasses of wine, and they sat on his small couch, the weight of the evening settling between them. Isabella felt emotionally drained, but more hopeful than she had in years. They're incredible, she said quietly. You've done such a beautiful job raising them. They're good kids, Daniel said, but she could see the pride in his face. Sometimes I wonder what they would have been like if they'd had a mother too. Isabella winced at the implicit accusation, but she didn't look away. I wonder that too. Every day. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the distant hum of traffic from the street below. Daniel, Isabella said finally, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. He turned to face her fully, his expression wary. Okay. How much time do we have before the disease? Before you can't? Daniel's face went carefully blank, the practiced expression of someone who had learned to discuss his own mortality with clinical detachment. The doctor says I'm still in the early stages, he said quietly. I have good days and bad days. The tremor is getting worse, and sometimes I have trouble with balance. But cognitively, I'm still fine. I can still work, still take care of them. But that will change. Yes, Daniel said simply. Eventually it will change. Maybe in 5 years, maybe in 10. There's no way to know for certain. Isabella felt the weight of that uncertainty, the terrible knowledge that their time was limited and unpredictable. What happens then? Have you made plans? Daniel's jaw tightened. My mother would take them if something happened to me. She's a good woman, loves them dearly, but she's 73 and lives in Florida. It wouldn't be ideal. And me? Isabella asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Have you considered me? Daniel was quiet for so long that Isabella thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful and measured. I've thought about it, he admitted. If you prove that you're committed, if you can show me that you won't run again when things get difficult, then yes. I've thought about it. Isabella felt a mixture of hope and terror at his words. The responsibility was enormous, not just caring for her daughters, but potentially caring for them while watching their father slowly disappear. I won't run, she said firmly. Whatever happens, however hard it gets, I won't run again. You can't know that, Daniel said, but there was less conviction in his voice than there had been a week ago. Yes, I can, Isabella insisted, because I've learned what it costs to run. I've spent 5 years paying the price for my cowardice, and I won't make that mistake again. Daniel studied her face in the dim light of the living room, searching for something Isabella couldn't name. They're going to need stability, he said finally. Not just money, though, God knows that will be important too. They're going to need someone who shows up every day, who puts their needs first, who loves them enough to stay when everything falls apart. I know, Isabella said, and I want to be that person. I want to learn how to be the mother they deserve. It's not something you can learn from books, Daniel warned. It's not like running a company where you can delegate the hard parts or buy your way out of problems. It's showing up at 3 a.m. when they have nightmares. It's sitting in hospital waiting rooms when they're sick. It's putting their needs before everything else, including your own ambition. I understand, Isabella said, though she wondered if she truly did. I want to try. And Daniel was quiet again, and Isabella could see him weighing her words against 5 years of abandonment and broken promises. If we do this, he said slowly, if we try to become a real family, there have to be rules, boundaries. I won't have you coming in and out of their lives whenever it's convenient for you. What kind of rules? You commit fully or not at all, Daniel said firmly. No more putting work first when they need you. No more disappearing when things get complicated. If you're going to be their mother, then you're going to be their mother every day, not just when it suits your schedule. Isabella nodded, understanding the weight of what he was asking. I can do that. And you have to tell them the truth, Daniel continued. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually. They deserve to know who you really are and why you were gone for so long. Isabella's stomach clenched at the thought of that conversation, of seeing disappointment and hurt replace the easy affection her daughters had shown her. What if they hate me when they know? Then we'll deal with that together, Daniel said. But Isabella, they're smart girls. They're going to figure it out eventually anyway. It's better if it comes from us when we're ready to help them process it. Isabella nodded, though the thought terrified her. When it feels right, Daniel said. When we're sure you're staying. When they're ready to hear it. They talked until nearly midnight, laying out the practical details of what it would mean for Isabella to become a real part of their lives. She would need to move closer, maybe find an apartment in Brooklyn. She would need to restructure her work schedule to be available for school events and doctor's appointments and the 1,000 small crises that made up childhood. She would need to learn how to braid hair and help with homework and navigate the complex social dynamics of second-grade friendships. It was overwhelming and terrifying and absolutely necessary. When Isabella finally left that night, she carried with her the memory of Grace's sleepy goodnight and Lily's matter-of-fact declaration that she was part of their family now. She also carried the weight of Daniel's cautious trust and the knowledge that this was her one chance to get it right. The subway ride back to Manhattan gave her time to think about everything that would have to change. Her penthouse apartment, perfectly suited for a single workaholic, would need to be traded for something that could accommodate children. Her schedule, currently dictated by board meetings and international conference calls, would need to revolve around school pickup times and bedtime routines. Her identity, so carefully constructed around professional achievement, would need to expand to include something she had never learned how to be. But for the first time in 5 years, Isabella felt like she was moving towards something instead of running away from it. She was going to become a mother, not just biologically, but in every way that mattered. She was going to earn the love of 2 remarkable children and help them navigate whatever challenges lay ahead. It wouldn't be easy. Daniel's diagnosis ensured that their family would face trials that no amount of money or success could fix. But Isabella had spent 5 years learning how to fight for what she wanted, and now she finally understood what was worth fighting for. As the train pulled into her station, Isabella made a mental list of everything she needed to do. Find a family-friendly apartment in Brooklyn. Restructure her company so she could step back from day-to-day operations. Learn how to braid hair and help with math homework, and comfort frightened children in the middle of the night. Most importantly, she needed to prove to Daniel and to herself that the woman who had built an empire from nothing could also build a family from the pieces of the one she had broken. The next morning, Isabella called her real estate agent and began the process of finding a new home. Not a showcase for her success, but a place where 2 little girls could feel safe and loved and free to be children. For the first time in 5 years, Isabella was coming home. 6 months later, Isabella stood in the kitchen of her new Brooklyn apartment, burning pancakes for the 3rd time that morning, while Grace and Lily dissolved into giggles at the breakfast table. The apartment was a far cry from her Manhattan penthouse, smaller, louder, filled with the chaotic warmth of actual family life. Children's artwork covered the refrigerator, science projects cluttered the counters, and there wasn't a single piece of furniture that cost more than a month of Daniel's teacher salary. It was perfect. "Mommy, they're black again," Grace called out helpfully, using the title that had emerged naturally over the past few months. Tested carefully at first, but now spoken with complete confidence. "I see that, sweetheart," Isabella said, scraping the charred remains into the garbage disposal. "Maybe cereal would be safer for everyone." "Daddy makes better pancakes anyway," Lily said pragmatically, then immediately looked stricken. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "It's okay, baby," Isabella said, kissing the top of Lily's head. "Daddy does make better pancakes. He makes better everything, actually. But I'm learning." And she was learning slowly, and sometimes painfully, how to be the mother she had been too frightened to become 5 years ago. She had learned to braid hair after watching 17 YouTube videos, though her attempts still looked somewhat lopsided compared to Daniel's neat work. She had mastered the art of packing school lunches complete with encouraging notes tucked between the sandwiches. She could now navigate parent-teacher conferences, playground politics, and the complex negotiations required to get 2 7-year-olds ready for school on time. Most importantly, she had learned that love wasn't something you could schedule or strategize. It was showing up every day even when you were exhausted. It was putting Band-Aids on scraped knees and reading the same bedtime story 17 times because Grace loved the way the fox outsmarted the wolf. It was sitting in emergency rooms when Lily fell off her bike holding small hands, while doctors explained that everything would be okay. The transition hadn't been seamless. There had been moments when Isabella's old instincts kicked in when she reached for her phone during family dinner or considered scheduling a conference call during Grace's school play. But each time she caught herself and made the choice that 5 years ago had seemed impossible, she chose them. The girls had adapted to having a mother with surprising resilience, though Isabella knew that the revelation of her true identity had been difficult for them to process. The conversation had happened 3 months ago, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, when the girls were helping Isabella organize her new home office. "Why do you have so many pictures of us as babies?" Lily had asked, holding up a photo that Isabella had commissioned from Daniel's old Facebook posts. Isabella's heart had stopped. She and Daniel had planned this conversation carefully, but the moment still felt impossibly daunting. "Can you both sit down for a minute?" Isabella had said, her voice steadier than she felt. "There's something important I need to tell you." The girls had settled on her couch, sensing the gravity of the moment. Daniel had appeared in the doorway, offering silent support as Isabella found the words to explain the unthinkable. "You know how some children have mommies who live with them, and some children have mommies who live far away," Isabella had begun carefully. "Like Tommy in our class," Grace had said. "His mommy lives in California." "Yes, like that. Well, I need to tell you something that might be confusing at first. I'm not just your daddy's friend who likes spending time with you. I'm actually your mommy. Your real mommy who went away when you were very little and is now trying to come home." The silence that followed had been deafening. Isabella had watched confusion, then understanding, then a dozen other emotions flicker across their faces. Lily, always the more analytical twin, had been the first to speak. "You're our mommy. Our real mommy who went away." "Yes," Isabella had whispered. "I'm so sorry I left you. I was scared and confused, and I made a terrible mistake. I've regretted it every day since." Grace had burst into tears, the kind of deep, wrenching sobs that broke Isabella's heart completely. "Why did you leave us? Didn't you love us?" "I loved you so much it scared me," Isabella had said, pulling Grace into her arms, while Lily watched with wide, solemn eyes. "I thought I wasn't good enough to be your mommy, so I ran away instead of learning how to be better. It was the worst mistake I've ever made." "But you came back," Lily had said thoughtfully. "Yes, I came back. And I'm never leaving again if you'll let me stay." The weeks that followed had been an emotional roller coaster. Grace had clung to Isabella with desperate intensity, as if afraid she might disappear again without warning. Lily had been more reserved, testing boundaries and asking difficult questions about why their mother had abandoned them. "Did you think about us while you were gone?" Lily had asked one night during bedtime stories. "Every single day," Isabella had answered honestly. I thought about what you might be learning in school, what your favorite games were, whether you remembered my voice. I missed you so much it felt like having a hole in my chest. Then why didn't you come back sooner? Grace had demanded. Because I was a coward, Isabella had said simply. I was afraid you wouldn't want me anymore. I was afraid I would hurt you again. I was afraid of a lot of things, and fear made me do something unforgivable. Gradually, painfully, they had worked through the complex emotions of reunion and forgiveness. Family therapy had helped, as had Daniel's patient guidance through the more difficult conversations. Dr. Sarah Chen, their counselor, had warned them that healing would take time, that there would be setbacks and challenges ahead. She had been right. There were still nights when Grace woke up crying, convinced that Isabella would be gone in the morning. There were moments when Lily would test her with deliberate defiance, as if trying to see if disappointing behavior would make her mother leave again. But there were also moments of pure joy that made every difficult day worthwhile. Like the morning Grace had crawled into Isabella's bed during a thunderstorm, whispering that Mommy's hugs were the best protection against scary sounds. Or the afternoon when Lily had dragged Isabella to the telescope to share her excitement about discovering a new constellation, her eyes bright with the assumption that her mother would be just as fascinated as she was. Now, 6 months into their new life, Isabella could see the changes in all of them. The girls were more confident, more secure in the knowledge that they were completely loved. Isabella herself had transformed from the cold, calculating CEO into someone she barely recognized, a woman who sang lullabies off-key and finger-painted kitchen tables, and found more satisfaction in a successful batch of homemade cookies than she had ever found in closing a billion-dollar deal. But it was Daniel who concerned her most. The disease was progressing slowly but inevitably. His left-hand tremor had worsened, and he sometimes stumbled when he was tired. More troubling were the subtle cognitive changes, moments when he searched for common words or forgot appointments that had been scheduled for weeks. He was still working, still functioning, but Isabella could see the fear in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. Not fear of dying necessarily, but fear of burdening them, of becoming someone the girls would remember with sadness rather than joy. "We need to talk," Daniel said that Saturday morning, appearing in the kitchen doorway, as Isabella finally gave up on breakfast and started setting out cereal bowls. Isabella's stomach clenched at his tone. They had been having these conversations more frequently lately, practical discussions about the future that neither of them wanted to face. "After breakfast," she suggested, glancing toward the girls who were absorbed in a complicated game involving Grace's art supplies and Lily's collection of planet models. Daniel nodded, but Isabella could see the weight he was carrying, the knowledge that they were running out of time to prepare for what was coming. After the girls had been settled with their weekend activities, Grace painting in her room, while Lily worked on a solar system project, Isabella and Daniel retreated to the small garden behind her apartment building. It was a peaceful space hidden from the bustle of Brooklyn life where they had held many of their most difficult conversations. "The doctor wants me to stop driving," Daniel said, without preamble, his voice carefully neutral. Isabella felt her heart sink. Daniel's independence had been one of the last markers of normalcy in their lives. Without it, he would become more dependent on her, more aware of his declining abilities. "What did he say exactly?" Isabella asked gently. "That my reaction times are getting slower. That it's not safe for me to be behind the wheel, especially with the girls in the car." Daniel's voice cracked slightly on the last words. "Isabella, I can't even drive my own children to school anymore." Isabella reached for his hand, feeling the tremor that was now constant, the physical manifestation of the disease that was stealing him piece by piece. "We'll figure it out," she said firmly. "I can drive them to school. We can take the subway places. There are options. This is just the beginning, Daniel said quietly. You know that, right? This is just the first of many things I'm going to lose. Eventually, I won't be able to work. I won't be able to take care of myself, let alone help with them. You're going to be doing this alone. The fear in his voice broke Isabella's heart. I won't be alone, she said fiercely. I'll have you for as long as possible, and I'll have them. We're a family, Daniel. We face this together. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands, as if they belonged to someone else. I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Isabella's pulse quickened. Okay. If something happens to me, if I get to the point where I can't make decisions for myself anymore, I want you to have full custody. Legal custody, not just the arrangement we have now. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. They had talked about this possibility in abstract terms, but hearing Daniel state it so plainly made it terrifyingly real. Are you sure? She asked. I've never been more sure of anything, Daniel said. Isabella, you've proven yourself in ways I never thought possible. You've put them first every single day for 6 months. You've learned to be the mother they need. And more than that, you've learned to be the woman I fell in love with again. Isabella felt tears burning her eyes. Daniel, let me finish, he said gently. I know we can't go back to what we were. Too much has happened. Too much trust was broken. But I want you to know that I forgive you. Completely. What you did 5 years ago doesn't matter anymore. What matters is who you've become and how much you love our girls. Isabella was crying openly now, overwhelmed by the weight of his forgiveness and the magnitude of what he was asking her to promise. I'll take care of them, she whispered. Whatever happens, however long we have, I'll take care of all of you. I know you will, Daniel said, and for the first time in months, his smile was free of shadows. That's why I can let go when the time comes, because I know they'll be loved. They held each other in the quiet garden, mourning the future they wouldn't have while celebrating the family they had managed to build from the pieces of their broken past. Isabella understood now that love wasn't about perfect timing or ideal circumstances. It was about showing up for the people who mattered, even when showing up was the hardest thing you'd ever done. That evening, as they gathered for their usual Saturday night movie tradition, Isabella watched her family with new eyes. Grace was curled against her side, absently braiding Isabella's hair while she watched the screen. Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, pointing out scientific inaccuracies in the space movie they'd chosen. Daniel was in his favorite chair, his tremor less noticeable when he was relaxed, his face peaceful as he watched his daughters enjoy themselves. This was what she had traded away 5 years ago, not just the children themselves, but this feeling of belonging, somewhere of being essential to someone else's happiness. No boardroom victory had ever felt as significant as Grace's sleepy mumble of, "I love you, Mommy," or Lily's excited explanation of why Jupiter couldn't actually support human life. Isabella, Daniel said, during a quiet moment between movies, there's something else I want to talk to you about. The girls were in the kitchen making popcorn, their voices carrying back to the living room as they debated the proper butter-to-salt ratio. What is it? Isabella asked. Daniel's expression was serious, but not fearful. I want to marry you again. Isabella's heart stopped. What? Not because we're in love the way we used to be, Daniel clarified quickly, but because I want the girls to have the security of knowing their parents are committed to each other. I want them to have your name legally, and I want to know that when I'm gone there won't be any question about where they belong. Isabella stared at him, trying to process what he was suggesting. Daniel, you don't have to. I want to, he said firmly. Isabella, we may not be able to recapture what we had before, but we've built something new, something better in some ways. We're partners now in a way we never were before. We trust each other with the most important thing in the world, our children's happiness. Isabella felt a warmth spreading through her chest, not the passionate love of their youth, but something deeper and more stable. Are you proposing to me? Daniel laughed, the sound lighter than it had been in months. I suppose I am. Will you marry me again, Isabella Hayes? Will you be my partner in raising our daughters and facing whatever comes next? Yes, Isabella said without hesitation. Yes, I'll marry you. When they told the girls the next morning, Grace shrieked with delight and immediately began planning the wedding dress she would design for Isabella. Lily asked practical questions about whether this meant they would officially be a normal family, and whether Isabella would legally be their mother now. Legally and in every other way that matters, Isabella assured her. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the small garden behind Isabella's apartment building, with only the girls and a handful of close friends in attendance. Isabella wore a simple blue dress that Grace had declared perfect for a mommy bride, and Daniel had managed to walk down the aisle without his cane, though Isabella could see the effort it cost him. Chen, who had become both counselor and friend, officiated the ceremony. The vows they exchanged were nothing like the romantic promises they had made 12 years earlier. Instead, they were practical commitments to partnership, to putting their children first, to facing the uncertain future as a team. I promise to love and protect our daughters, Isabella said, her voice steady as she looked into Daniel's eyes. I promise to honor the family you built while I was away, and to be worthy of the trust you're placing in me. I promise to face whatever comes next with courage, Daniel replied, and to trust that our girls will be loved and cared for no matter what happens to me. Grace cried through the entire ceremony, though she insisted they were happy tears. Lily served as both ring-bearer and wedding photographer, taking her duties with characteristic seriousness when Dr. Chen pronounced them, married, the girls cheered and threw flower petals they had collected from the community garden. It wasn't a fairy tale wedding, but it was perfect for the family. They had become practical, loving, and absolutely real. The months that followed were a delicate balance of joy and sorrow. Daniel's condition continued to deteriorate, though slowly enough that he was able to see Grace's first art show at school and help Lily build a model rocket for the science fair. Isabella treasured every moment of lucidity, every shared glance over the girls' heads, every quiet conversation about their daughters' futures. She also began preparing herself for the inevitable. She restructured Nexus Technologies so that she could work primarily from home, bringing in a CEO to handle day-to-day operations while she remained as board chair. She learned everything she could about Huntington's disease, preparing for the practical challenges of caring for Daniel while protecting the girls from the worst of his decline. Most importantly, she continued building her relationship with Grace and Lily, earning their trust one day at a time. She attended every school event, learned the names of their friends, mastered the art of birthday party planning and Halloween costume creation. She became the mother they had always deserved, even as she watched their father slowly fade. The end came on a Tuesday morning in spring, almost exactly 1 year after Isabella had seen them in Central Park. Daniel had been struggling with his speech for weeks, his words coming slowly and sometimes in the wrong order. But that morning he woke up unusually clear and present, as if the disease had granted him one final gift of clarity. Isabella, he said, as she brought him breakfast in bed. I need you to know something. What is it? She asked, settling beside him. I'm proud of who you've become, not just as a mother, but as a person. You've grown into someone I would never have imagined when we first met." Isabella felt tears threaten, but she kept her voice steady. "Thank you for giving me the chance to become her." "Take care of our girls," Daniel said simply. "Help them remember the good parts of having me as their father." "They'll remember," Isabella promised. "They'll remember how much you loved them, how hard you fought for them, how you taught them to be kind and curious and brave." Daniel smiled, and for a moment Isabella saw the young man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. "I love you, Isabella. Not the way I used to, but in a way that's deeper and more true. You're the mother of my children and my partner in the most important work either of us will ever do." "I love you too," Isabella said, and meant it completely. Daniel passed peacefully that evening, surrounded by his family. The girls cried, but weren't surprised they had been prepared as gently as possible for this moment. Isabella held them close and promised that their daddy's love would always be with them, that nothing could ever take away the foundation he had built for their lives. The funeral was small but beautiful, attended by Daniel's colleagues, parents from the girls' school, and neighbors who had watched him raise his daughters with such obvious devotion. Grace drew a picture of the three of them together in heaven, which they buried with Daniel, along with letters Lily had written about all the things she wanted to tell him about space exploration. In the weeks that followed, Isabella watched her daughters grieve with a resilience that spoke to Daniel's careful preparation and unconditional love. There were difficult nights when Grace woke up calling for Daddy afternoons, when Lily seemed lost without their daily telescope sessions. But there were also moments of unexpected joy, as if the girls were determined to honor their father's memory by continuing to find wonder in the world he had taught them to love. "Mommy," Grace said one evening, as Isabella tucked her into bed, "are you sad that Daddy's gone?" "Very sad," Isabella said honestly, "but also grateful that we had him for as long as we did, and that he taught us how to love each other." "He wanted us to be happy," Grace said, with the matter-of-fact wisdom of childhood. "So we should try to be happy, right?" "Right," Isabella agreed, marveling at her daughter's intuitive understanding of what Daniel would have wanted for them. 6 months later, Isabella stood in the kitchen of their brownstone home. They had moved to a larger place to accommodate their growing family, making pancakes that only turned out slightly burned. Grace and Lily, now 8 years old and thriving despite their loss, chattered about their upcoming school talent show and the sleepover they were planning with friends. Isabella had never imagined this life for herself: single motherhood, quiet, domestic joy, the profound satisfaction of raising children who felt completely secure in their mother's love. It wasn't the fairy tale reunion she might have dreamed of 5 years ago, but it was something better, a real family built on trust, forgiveness, and the hard-won knowledge that love was a choice you made every single day. "Mommy, you're burning them again," Lily observed cheerfully. "Story of my life," Isabella said, laughing as she scraped another batch into the garbage. "Good thing you two like cereal." "Oh, it's okay," Grace said generously. "Daddy used to burn them too when he was learning. Maybe cooking just takes practice like art." "Maybe it does," Isabella agreed, pulling her daughters close for the kind of spontaneous hug that had become natural over the past year. "Maybe everything important takes practice." That afternoon, they visited Daniel's grave as they did every month, bringing fresh flowers and stories about their week. Grace had painted a new picture of their family, now showing just the three of them, but somehow still whole and complete. Lily shared her latest astronomy discoveries and promised to keep studying the stars the way Daddy had taught her. As they walked home through Prospect Park, Isabella reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She had lost everything she thought mattered: her perfect corporate life, her carefully controlled world, her illusion that success could substitute for love. But in losing everything, she had found the one thing that actually did matter: her children, and the privilege of being their mother. "Mommy," Grace said, slipping her small hand into Isabella's as they walked. "I'm glad you came back." "So am I, sweetheart," Isabella replied, squeezing her daughter's hand. "So am I." Above them, the late afternoon sky was clear and blue, dotted with clouds that Grace would probably want to draw when they got home. Lily was already pointing out the constellation patterns they would see when darkness fell, her father's telescope waiting patiently in their living room window. They were a family, imperfect, grief-touched, but absolutely real. Isabella had finally learned the difference between success and significance, between achievement and love. She had come home not to the life she had left behind, but to the life she had always been meant to build. And for the first time in her adult life, Isabella Hayes, mother-widow, former CEO, was exactly where she belonged.